All right, the former Bush 41 economic policy advisor, Todd Buchholz, and the Washington Examiner's Emily Jashinsky. Emily, it might be an aggressive timetable to talk about getting this done or voted on before the July 4th recess. Do you think Mitch McConnell will force a vote either way, even if he doesn't have the votes?
No, I don't think he will. I mean, I think there's some room here, because if you look at what happened on the House side, you had the Freedom Caucus echoing pretty much exactly what Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Mike Lee are saying here, is that all this needs to do is get to a place where it lowers premiums to get them on board. They may need longer time than before the July 4th recess to do that, but it is doable, so he probably would be smarter to take his time, take a breath, and get there if he thinks he can at all.
Todd, what do you think?
Well, look, they unveiled this bill on a Thursday. Today is Friday. Folks in Washington are already leaving town for the weekend. I think there's precious little time and very little momentum at this point. Republicans are feeling not quite panic-stricken, but I don't think that the spirit of compromise is in the air yet. Now, understandably, President Trump feels as if he was burned by Paul Ryan on the House side, made a slew of phone calls. Ultimately, that failed on the floor. I don't think President Trump wants to do that again. So I think that it won't get done by July 4th. At least that's my bet.
You know, the fear always is in that event, Emily, than other things that hinge on this. For example, tax reform, which is what at least the markets really want to see, and actually a good many Republicans want to see far more agreement on that, for example, than on this. First of all, do you find that to be the case, or that are there really, plenty of fights to be picked with that one as well?
Well, I think tax reform is going to be tougher than we think, but I still think it would be easier than health care. I think they're trying to include several things in this tax reform bill that aren't necessarily directly related to tax reform. So I think it could get a little stickier than we're expecting, but it's still a much easier pitch. They're talking about the postcard size tax brackets. I mean, that's being able to do your taxes on a postcard size. That's an easy pitch to the American people. It would be politically easier to do. I think it could still get sticky, but what we're seeing here, when you need to have something that someone like Susan Collins can accept and something like Rand Paul can accept, that's much more difficult.
Todd, when I look at this, they're not that far apart, if you think about it, on some of the key issues. That is, even Republicans with Democrats. I mean, despite Democrats calling this mean and heartless and all that, Republicans are maintaining the basic structure of the Affordable Care Act. It's just a less omnibus, government program, right?
Well, the bill does repeal all of the taxes, which were pretty darn onerous, including on medical device companies.
The Cadillac tax stays for premium plans, and
Well, the tax on investment income comes off, the medical device tax comes off, but it's kind of this ironic situation where Rand Paul and Ted Cruz says it's Obamacare light, and the front page of the New York Times has two articles stacked on top of each other saying it destroys all of Obamacare. So in a way,
by the way, in one of those New York Times stories, and that's a very good point, they go on to point that out, and then all of a sudden point out the fact that it's not that different as well. So the headline belies something else. Go ahead.
Well, Neil, you know what? President Obama was almost like a character, almost like Bruce Willis in a Die Hard movie. He leaves office slapping this incendiary device on the side of the ship of state called Obamacare, which leads to higher premiums, higher taxes, people losing insurance, and then it's left to the Republicans to try to solve it. Now, of course, the Republicans took on this challenge, and they have to deliver. That doesn't mean they're not excused from this extraordinarily difficult task. But let's face it, it is extraordinarily difficult to repeal an entitlement. I kind of wonder whether McConnell should say, well, sentence number 1 of the Senate bill is, we hereby repeal Obamacare, and then in the details we'll see that, in fact, it's not entirely done, but enough to placate at least 50 U.S. senators.
The irony of this situation, at least to me, Emily, and both of you are much closer to this than I, that this does not, and I know maybe we might disagree slightly on this, repeal Obamacare. When push comes to shove, and I think, Todd, you're actually right, with all the taxes taken out, or most of them, you're right, it doesn't mimic it in that respect, but it keeps it in large part. So Democrats who were concerned about Republicans acting on repealing it outright, they needn't have worried. And Republicans who were hell-bent on assuring their base that they were going to repeal this. They didn't. So, Emily, I guess what I'm saying is Republicans could have saved themselves a lot of trouble about getting enough Republican votes by agreeing at the beginning we're not going to repeal this thing or junk it entirely. So that would have assured at least a few more Democratic votes to offset whatever agita they're having now.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I actually think what they're going to end up doing is spinning something that does not repeal Obamacare as they pledged, root and branch. That's a quote from Mitch McConnell. They're going to spin it as a repeal. You may even see the senators like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Ron Johnson come out and say, this is a repeal enough. It's not going to get to a root and branch repeal of the government takeover of healthcare that we saw with Obamacare. It's just not going to happen. So they may have actually saved themselves some trouble in saying, we understand this. We're realists, and this is the game that we're playing. This is what we're working with.
All right, Todd. You know, if this doesn't come to pass or gets delayed, they don't get to a vote before the July 4th recess, and let's say it's pushed back further, are there any options for Republicans to say, all right, we tried, but we failed? Rand Paul was telling me that is not an option. You have to do this. You have to do this right before you can entertain the whole tax thing. What do you think?
No, I think President Trump at that point would be quite frustrated, want to move on to cutting taxes, tax reform, and then let Obamacare implode. Blame it on the Democrats, and then the Republicans will have more, will have a mandate to actually do something that is root and branch and radical. But I don't think Donald Trump can risk his presidency on the patience of squabbling in the U.S. Senate.
All right.
He moves on.
All right. We shall see. Guys, thank you both very, very much. Have a good weekend.